Hi, Susan from Worldpeacefull, and I've been reflecting a lot over the last few days on 21st century education. The Australian federal government announced the renewed Gonski report, which is in essence to encourage more personalised learning. They're talking about moving away from mass education to completely reforming the system, in a sense, within a narrative of meeting the individual needs of children, that they learn at different paces. They're all IT based. And of course, on the surface, it sounds really interesting. But there are layers and layers and layers to this issue. And the beauty of being in a democracy is that we all have an opportunity to put our perspective into the ring. Whether that's heard or not is another matter, but expression and freedoms come from what we choose to value as citizens in an economy. So I'm going to introduce you to some ideas where these original thoughts came from, because they're certainly not new to Australia. They've been circulating from the United States for quite a long time. So I've already recorded a blog called How Exactly Did the Department of Defence End Up in My Child's Classroom? This caught my eye because clearly it's a parent that's written it. And this parent's actually gone into doing some research on the subject of IT or ICT in the classrooms. I've also talked to other teachers, and there's great concerns around the ICT. It actually changes the way children think. It repatterns the neural networks in the brain. I had one primary school teacher say to me that she was noticing that she had to really step children through to understand things. They weren't able to laterally think outside the box because they were so, in a sense, programmed into a certain stepwise way of learning. And she has noticed with the children that they're changing in their ability to more laterally think. So it has implications, in my view, for creativity and innovation, also the uniqueness of every individual. And often when organisations or governments roll out these ideas, it does sound interesting the way they've done it. But we need to get really clear about what is being done and is it truly in the best interests of children. So I'll turn to this article now. How exactly did the Department of Defence end up in my child's classroom? And you can decide for yourself. You cannot fully understand what is happening with Future Ready School Redesign 1.1, device programs, embedded assessments, gamification, this is games, classroom management apps, and the push for students in neighbourhood schools to supplement instruction with online courses until you grasp the role the federal government and the Department of Defence more specifically have played in bringing us to where we are today. This is the US Department of Defence. In 1999, just as cloud-based computing was coming onto the scene, President Bill Clinton signed Executive Order 13111 and created the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative, or ADL. Section 5 of that order set up the Advisory Committee on Expanding Training Opportunities to advise the President on what should be done to make technology-based education a reality for the entire country. And the author has put entire in capitals. That's the clue. The intent was not only to prioritise technology for lifelong learning, but also shift the focus to developing human capital, and in doing so, bind education to the needs of industry and the economy. I'm just going to add in a little bit here. I'm always, as an economist myself, I'm never comfortable with the word human capital. It dehumanises us and it sees us as an asset. We're also, on the other side of that, a cost of production. Sort of like a dehumanising wording. This person goes on to say, binding education to the needs of industry. Do we want to bind education to the needs of industry, or do we want to educate children with basic values, with social skills, with basic tools like maths, English, science, and then have them create pathways for themselves? Now, that's not to say they won't get work, they will. But it's not just a full focus on education for the needs of industry. The key question here is, do we want to advance our civilization? And I believe this is the so-called cultural rub that many are clashing around. There are those who want to completely service industry's needs, and there are those who wish to advance civilization in a way that actually meets the needs of citizens. In truth, as an economist myself, what I was taught was the purpose of the economy was to actually serve the people. It wasn't meant to be the other way around, where the purpose of the economy was for the people to serve the economy. The idea of distributing goods and services in a competitive forum was to bring down the cost of those products and services so that people could benefit. It was also to encourage more efficiency in respect of who supplies those particular products and services. So obviously the most efficient producer would gain more market share. But with the accumulation of wealth and money and influence, this has been the game changer, where a significant percentage see themselves as being served by the community. This is not what the purpose of democracy was about. And so I put this in as an addition to this article, because what we choose as a community will actually affect the future of children. Do we choose education that's going to develop the whole child, or do we choose education that's simply going to serve industry needs? And we've certainly seen that happening with the university shifting their focus and their funding in this direction. Is this in the public interest? So I'll read on. Representatives of Cisco Systems and Jobs for the Future co-chaired the committee. This is the Advisory Committee on Expanding Training Opportunities, just to remind you. Others around the table included the e-learning industry, student loan financiers, educational testing companies, human resource managers, labour market analysts, universities, community colleges, chambers of commerce, city government, and a futurist. Looks like there was one there. Bush incorporated Clinton's work into Executive Order 13218. You may want to check that. The 21st Century Workforce Initiative. The following year, giving the effort of bipartisan stamp of approval. Okay, so the 21st Century Workforce Initiative happened the following year. Both sides of politics supported it. So we don't have any opposition here, right? The Obama administration continued this push for online learning in the National Broadband Plan. In Australia, we're talking about the Broadband Network, NBN, National Broadband Network. So we can see this is grafted off a US initiative. So this push for online learning in the National Broadband Plan contained an entire chapter on digital education. as well as through a variety of 21st century school redesign efforts like Connect ED, or one word, Future Ready Schools, and Digital Promise. I'm just going to reflect on this for a little bit. So obviously the National Broadband Network, in our case, and the National Broadband Plan in this case, is about connecting everybody up in the one network. This creates a controllable network. It means if everybody's connected, people can be seen, everything you do becomes visible. Same applies with the iPhones as well. Very easy to tap into those iPhones through wireless, and actually issues of privacy arise when this is given free market, if you like, expanse. So what I mean by that is, under free market doctrines, it's really about allowing the market freedom to do what it wants. So when we talk of freedom, we often hear these words bandied around, but it's really about freedom for whom? Are people free when their private data, their conversations, their children's activities can be monitored through interconnections? This is a really big issue. They're called digital education. Well, how does this contrast with book reading? How does that affect the neural networks in the brain? How does it affect the biology of the body when you're constantly staring at a screen? I mean, I'm of the generation where the computers first came out and back issues became more prevalent because we were sitting at computers for long periods of time. Our eyesight was affected. Most people wear glasses. Why is that? It's because they're not getting outside. They're not extending their vision to the horizon. People are taking tablets for vitamin D. People are taking antidepressants so they don't get depressed. This is so that they can somehow tailor themselves to fit that system. And this is the economic system they're seeking to fit, rather than the whole system coming around the needs of people. This is really the clear issue. So the digital is another interesting word. Digital promise, they're saying here, digital education. And I contrasted that with book learning, because you actually got something tangible. It's natural light, you're reading. There's something in the reading process that's really good for learning how to analyse, learning how to work between different forms of information. On a screen, you flick screens, but there's still that low-level radiation from the screen. It's actually not that healthy. We're also picking up radiation from our phones, and I do have concerns about brain tumours in the future, particularly having phones right up near the brain. That's something to consider. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know, but it's an area I've had some concerns about. There's also the information age versus this digital age. I've noticed it's shifted. I was studying when I was doing my economics degree and marketing, those two areas is my speciality. What I remember doing was a paper on the leisure society. This is when this information society first arose, and this is back in the 80s when I was studying. And the idea was this technology that they're talking about here was supposed to be labour saving. So it was supposed to save you time. And of course we can see blenders, microwaves, we get people in to clean our houses sometimes, if you've got the money to do it. People have technologies that they use that make things a lot quicker. That was the idea of the information society. But what actually did happen was that it sped up with technology. The idea was that it was supposed to give people more time to actually do what they want, to have more time with their family, time with their friends, they're doing their hobbies. In Australia, we had the 888 rule, which was, coming out through Trades Hall, which is, this was where the centre of the union movement started in Australia, actually First Labor Party in the world, I believe, came from here. So 888 was really about balance. You work 8 hours a day, you rest 8 hours, and then 8 hours of leisure. It's about balance. The union movement were attempting to create, in a sense, an advocacy for people who were working. And so that then became this tension between business and unions, and it played out its conflict in politics we saw later. And of course, those on the margins missed out completely from both those focuses of labour and business. But predominantly, the control and the power resided within economic activity. Whether you're an employer or an employee, that became the base of power. And so our thinking has been shaped by economic imperatives because we've linked that to I need a job, I need money. We became dependent on the system. That then shapes the way we see, and it also truncates, or if you like, limits what we say, because we're concerned that if we speak up, we might lose our job. And that's the umbilical cord to our own sense of survival. And that's how this system has been configured, that we are dependent on it. Therefore, we're suggestible. We know not to rock the boat because it causes all sorts of problems. Yet we're in a democracy. And of course, others will argue, no, we're not, because really is our voice heard? I think through YouTube, we've got more of an opportunity to have a voice. I think it's an absolute necessity, having been a market analyst myself, that that voice of the many is heard, not just the few in industries that have profitable interests in this. The reason other voices should be heard is because it impacts on their lives directly. Anything that has an impact on you, you have a right, in my opinion, to speak up about. So we'll go on. We've just talked about the National Broadband Plan, the fact that it's all interconnected, this digital education scenario that's being played out here, which has been given presidential legitimacy through Clinton, Bush and Obama in the case of the United States, which impacts other countries like Australia. It goes on to say ADL began as an electronic classroom for the National Guard. So my understanding of the National Guard is, I'm assuming it's part-time, where people take on more of a military enrolment, if you like. They're National Guard, so they come out during emergencies and things like that, would be my understanding of that. So it came out through that and later expanded to serve the entire Defence Department. In 1998, the government decided to use it for all federal employee training. And by leveraging its influence over federal contracting, the government successfully pushed for standards that enabled wide adoption of cloud-based instructional technology. As the Department of Defence worked on e-learning for the military in the mid-1990s, the Department of Education put together the nation's first educational technology plan. So in the US, this has been going since the 1990s. In Australia, this is more recent. Apparently it was completed, this first educational technology plan was completed in 1996. A tremendous infusion of federal funds was released into schools to support technology purchases and expand internet access. The FCC's E-Rate program was established that year. And I can remember a few years ago, certainly the technology was made available for schools here in Australia as well. So we've been following the US, which is kind of interesting given that Australia was actually leading the world in many respects in terms of its social policies. Certainly under the Whitlam years in the 70s, we were very advanced and we had Medicare full health coverage for everybody. We've still got it, but it's slowly eroding given the advancement of private sector medical organisations, if you like. So the privatisation of health care. Australia also had a free school system. I can remember free public transport when I was growing up. I can remember, water and utilities, particularly water, was free. We used to pay gas and electricity, but water was free. We had a very good standard of living back in the 70s and 80s. In the 80s, it was starting to dwindle. But at that sort of period, 60s, 70s, it was actually an optimal time to be here. There was a lot of freedom. It was also around the Vietnam War years, and the US citizens would recognise this. There was a lot more activity from citizens who were protesting and trying to have a voice. So this is talking about this technology being released into schools. It's coming out of the Department of Defence, as did the internet. At the same time, IMS Global began to advance implementation of e-learning systems. This non-profit began as a higher education trade group and now has over 150 contributing members, including IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, and Pearson, and hundreds upon hundreds of affiliated companies and institutions that use its open source specifications. The Gates Foundation is a platinum level sponsor of 4 major IMS global initiatives. Okay, so the Gates Foundation is obviously sponsoring it. So these contributing members are all IT based by the looks, obviously, because there's profit to be made from the e-learning. They can see a market. And of course, e-learning is online learning. So you sit in front of your computer and you go through prescribed courses. It's very solo, although I guess they will set up, discussions and chat rooms and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, we're dealing with an online environment as distinct from face-to-face in front of people, and there is a difference. Over 20 years, IMS Global members shared research and resources and built up an industry now valued at $255 billion annually. So if you still wonder why they won't give education back to human teachers, you simply need to take a close look at the many politically connected interests that are counting on digital education becoming the new paradigm. So that statement there is really saying that they're removing the human teachers who are predominantly females. I've had insights into this in respect of gender. I've been very impressed with female teachers myself, and I've seen the majority of teachers are females, particularly in primary. I came in as a peace clown teaching peace education, which was really developing values. The values I was doing were universally embedded. This is the real embedding of values from human to human contact, three-dimensional experiential education, which is not just theoretical where you're looking at a screen and you're watching videos. See, that's more like a observational type of education. You're learning what you're taught to learn, basically. And that does happen in the classroom, to be fair, as well. But there's more dynamism in the classroom. Other kids are saying things. Kids are asking questions. I used to do critical thinking, get the kids to brainstorm a value like responsibility or empathy or awareness or love. What's truth? What is telling the truth? Can you speak the truth all the time? Awareness, what do you notice? What don't you notice? Empathy, are you able to stand in another's shoes? This has implications for bullying, which is a massive problem in schools and in society now. Typically, the empathy is disconnecting. Why is that happening? because we're not feeling other people. The emotional side of our life has been dumbed down because it's seen as somehow some wild landscape. It's not. It's natural to have emotions. We're meant to feel what we feel. We get angry, we cry, we laugh. This is the human condition. It's not about just turning up in a, like a, what do they call them? The icons. Just try to remember, avatars. We're not just avatars popping up with this perfect narrative. We feel things. This is being human. Now I'm just going to, this is a slight allude, but I feel to do it. I saw children transform before my eyes when I taught them what power meant, real power. I call it power within, not power over. Bullying is power over. I take your power. We do it in lots of forums. It's done through government, business, community organisations, families, between people. At the early childhood level, we see it starting to emerge because it's role played out by those close to children. What the bullying really is powerlessness, parading as power. It's seeking control on some level. It's seeking to feel a sense of an expansion of identity. So why I'm saying this is these experiential types of formats as deliverables in schools are incredibly important for children to feel these experiences. To not just go through an anti-bullying video online that describes it. You can't possibly learn about how to empower yourself in a bullying situation from a two-dimensional screen. You can feed children all the answers you want through a technology, but they need to role play face-to-face. They need to know how to manage those situations. They need to know how to communicate with other children. Now, if they get disconnected through technology, they're not going to know how to communicate with other children. They're going to feel higher rates of anxiety. More children are getting drugged these days. They're giving them tablets to calm them down. The behavioural problems in the classroom are reflective of the societal problems through overworking, marriage breakdown. Now, we can't just siphon off education system into a silo of a cyber reality, ultimately at the extreme end where all education becomes channeled through that process, and ignore the social disintegration that's going on around that child. Children are seeing their parents break up. This is very painful for children. Children are being sent to daycare centres as part of a strategy to institutionalise children so that they're not necessarily having that strong bond with the family, particularly the mother. I'm just saying what I think in this moment because these are the thoughts that are coming to me around this. How does the mental health issues get resolved by children in these ICT environments simply ignoring the world and focusing on a world inside that computer? Is that the real world? What is the real world? For myself, I feel it when I'm fully experiencing the things that I love to do and be. When I'm living to my highest potential is when I feel that sense of full interconnectedness with my world. When I feel all my feelings, I'm not denying them and pushing them down and saying, this is not acceptable to speak up. This is not acceptable to cry. It is acceptable. It is human. I'm bringing this in because we are disconnecting the humanities from this cyber reality, which is a predominantly male creation. And I say that with love and respect to men. This is not anything to do with feminism. This is to do with distinct differences in gender. Females are much more communicative face-to-face. Most females are not playing on the computers. They might use them for their work, but most females are not drawn. They prefer face-to-face interaction. Yet, we see a lot of the boys on the computers playing their games. There's a lot of war games going on to the computers, which affects young children. It programs into those young children the acceptability of conflict. Now, I'm a peace educator. I see the ramification of that. It sets up in early childhood an acceptability, a willingness that this is okay, it's endorsed by the society, all this violence. Some of these games are horrendous. Children are reloading, rearming. And yeah, they're having fun because they don't feel threatened. But these things can translate later on into an acceptance that warfare is the way we solve problems. And I would like to uncategorically state here that violence does not solve any problem whatsoever. It actually creates more fear. It destroys people's lives on the ground. Those engaging in these behaviours are completely disconnected through training from the reality, the real world, which is we are here for each other. This is not to say that computers and technology are not a useful tool. I'm using it right now. It's an absolutely useful tool. I have no issue with the use of computers. But we have to come at this problem philosophically in respect of how this is going to impact the neural networks of children. If they're constantly engaged in logic, not relational, not creative, not feeling-based thinking, then certain parts of the brain are going to wire for that. Now, as I said earlier on in this video, I met primary school and early childhood teachers. I've met quite a few who were saying to me that the children are losing the capacity to think outside the box. Now, this sets up for mind control. This is the frequency of mind control. Now, if those who are behind this are aware of this, then it's a deliberate strategy. If they're not aware of it, then I would then invite them, if they're serious about supporting education in the world, to invite in the society to have a say on this, because it's their children that they're going to hook up to computers. It's their children that will get tracked by this technology, because once everybody's in the broadband network, then any hacker, any government agency can monitor what they're doing. Do you want your children monitored? Even in the monitoring of this child's performing well, this child's not. And I know about this, as I've said in my blog. I actually had the opportunity to be at an event where an education department and a computer IT company who was tendering to bring in technology into education was presenting. So the IT company was presenting to education, and I was typing up everything that was said. And they showed video, footage of the nodes that come from the child. So you've got the child at the centre, there's a node here, there's a node there, there's another node here. This could be there could be a particular part of their schoolwork, could be maths, could be science, could be English, could be their friends, could be their hobbies. Those nodes can expand out, their interests, where they go and buy things. When I saw that, I thought, I think it all depends on the human beings who are utilising the technology and their intention behind it. Is their intention to monitor and track people for control purposes, or is their intention to genuinely help a child by, I don't like the word monitoring, but let's just say evaluating where they're at and helping them where they need to be helped? Are these children following their interests like you'd see in a Montessori or Steiner type or Waldorf school, where the child is at the centre and all education in a sense, emanates from the child's interests? Or is it coming from a world perspective of we want the children to learn all these things so that they'll be better in industry? These are really, really important questions that I'm putting in this video, because I think this is actually probably one of the most important issues of our time, is what's going on right now. So I'll leave you to contemplate that, and I'll continue reading this because this parent has put this together and it's really showing some real issues. So there's big money to be made in getting the children online, and by having the female teachers predominantly step back, it gives more control to those who wish to deliver the information and the type of information they want the children to take up, rather than the wisdom of bringing information or knowledge out of children, which is the work I wish to expand in the future, is the wisdom. So IMS Global and ADL teamed up to establish common standards for metadata and content packaging, so that's your programs, of so-called learning objects. In the world of 21st century education, reformers anticipate school will become largely about children interacting with these online learning objects. A playlist education, if you will, where based on your past performance, algorithms will serve up what they think you need to know next. So I'll just read that a bit better. A playlist education. So a playlist education, you can select from the list. It's prescribed. Metadata. So they're going to collect all the data. So there's privacy issues with the metadata, as we know, through Snowden, in respect of NSA, metadata issues in relation to broadband networks, metadata being accessed without permission for people who have committed no crime. So it moves you out of the intelligence prism where it was gathered in order to protect the national interest. Now we're seeing metadata being collected by government on its own citizens, and that's at the precipice we're at right now, is the brave new world opening up, or people speaking up and going off in a different direction. Content packaging is deciding what goes in those computer programs for the children. Calling them learning objects is really interesting wording. Very interesting. So the children will interact with these objects and playlists, and there'll be algorithms that will be determining your performance and where you go next. So it's very much like a decision tree is what I see. It's very masculine thinking. I say that not because I have anything, this is not disparaging of men. I love men very much, but I know we think differently is all I'm really illustrating here. I also know there's men that think very much like women, and there's women who think very much like men. So it's not really a hard and fast divide, but there are orientations that are very powerfully different between males and females in the way that we think and communicate. So I'm putting a feminine perspective definitely on this. So they say for folks like Reed Hastings, Jeff Bezos, or Mark Zuckerberg, that's Facebook, and we know what happened with that, such an education where students consume predetermined content seems the ultimate in efficiency. Gamified experiences and online simulations being developed through ADL and DARPA in partnership with many universities and non-profits, and also provides a structure to capture students' soft skills and shape their behaviour. I just want to look over that again. See, the children consume predetermined content. So it's not like the child is determining what their interests are. Someone is determining what they want them to consume. They see them as consumers. That's the mindset. It's predetermined content, and they see it as efficient. Depends on your objective, doesn't it? See, my objective is freedom, and other people's objectives won't be freedom. It'll be freedom to consume what we put before you. I laugh because there's a part of me that sees the game in all of this as well. And so they'll put it into games, which is, I obviously think that's a really clever approach. They put it into games because particularly the boys, they go for the games, it's competitive. And that instills the self-interest, not the community interest. It's all about me. I want to win, win, win. So that's the frequency we're dealing with here, is training in this mindset of competition where we win, and that's an incentive because then we go to the next level, we get a reward. So they'll have rewards coming back as feedback. Children go, wow, let's go to the next level. And that's how the designers have thought this. I can see that. I can see my hair on my lip. Got a hair on. DARPA, I believe, is the defence, to do with defence. I'm just going to check that out. So just give me a second while I go into my own information. Let's see what they say. So it's very interesting what's being proposed here. I always marvel at the cleverness of it. But what I see is they're not looking at it with emotional intelligence. And that's what I'm interested in, is the emotional intelligence, because that's the part we don't see. This is the social and emotional well-being. This is the social emotional skills we talk a lot about in the bullying area, because children are losing those skills. The bullying is occurring because the children are not being given the balance emotionally. Particularly the boys, they're very disconnected. But we're seeing girls also falling into the trap of trying to be like boys. So they're trying to show that they're more violent in order to move away from the fragile female image. But that is not a female. That is a female trying to be a male to compete with males so that she's not vulnerable. That's what I see in the young girls, and it's a major mistake. I'll just see if I can find DARPA, because I'm not on the internet right at the moment, so I can't actually just quickly Google it, unfortunately. But I might get lucky. Or I know where I need to go. Hang on. I remember where I put it. Anyway, I might come back to that. He might talk a little bit more about it. I'll come back to it because it might take a bit too much time. And we lose our thread, and I don't want that. So they talk about ADL and DARPA in partnership with many universities and non-profits will also provide a structure to capture students' soft skills. I'm laughing because soft skills are the emotions, and shape their behaviour. The first product ADL and IMS Global came up with was called SCORM, SCORM, or Shared Content Object Reference Model. SCORM provided pathways for the bits and pieces of an e-learning content to get to a particular learning management system, like Dreambox, accessed by a particular student. It tracked elements like course completion, pages viewed, and test scores. Well, there's your tracking coming in, and that's the big issue for parents with children being tracked. I don't think the parents are going to want that. I know I wouldn't. By 2008, there was a desire to track a student's interaction with devices outside of the fixed learning management systems. I'm going to repeat this because this is one of the crucial issues. By 2008, there was a desire to track a student's interaction with devices outside of fixed learning management systems. New devices and games often did not work with the SCORM framework. EdTech proponents wanted students to be able to interact with online content in new ways. So they could record interactions taking place on mobile platforms. Just want to repeat that. EdTech proponents wanted students to be able to interact with online content in new ways so that they could record interactions taking place on mobile platforms directly through browser searches or via Internet of Things sensors. Now, this is an invasion of privacy, and this is the real concern with IT, is that wherever that child is going is being monitored and recorded. They're getting a profile on the child, finding out what their interests are. I know I'm a market analyst. If I was still in that mindset, I'd be thinking, great, we can then find out exactly what they want. We market to that. This is why these images pop up on Facebook, wherever they are. Those ads pop up based on what they're interested in. We can say, well, that's fine. Well, no, it's like advertising on television. We are being influenced by those ads. Is it truly what we want? Do we really want to be tracked wherever we go, or do we want privacy to do what interests us? What if a child goes off on tangents that are not very positive and that becomes part of their profile? What if they make mistakes? They do online videos like this, but maybe they've had some drugs or they're with friends and they say the wrong thing. What happens then? It stays in a cyber reality and it never leaves. As children could have histories that could be very problematic and could actually place them in a box. ADL commissioned a new specification that could track activity streams as students interacted with online media. The result was XAPI, or Tin Can API, you might want to check that out, which debuted in 2011. Now, all sorts of data can be monitored, tracked, and put into data lockers or learning record stores. LRS, learning record stores, can store information about what videos you watched, what online quizzes you took, and the results, what websites you visited, what books you purchased, what games you played, what articles you read or annotated. It can also capture data gathered via sensors, RFID chips, and biometric monitors. That's the eye, biometric. LRS collect data about all sorts of so-called informal learning experiences, and this is the key issue here. The MacArthur, MACARTHUR Foundation has been funding considerable research in digital media learning, DML, in informal settings for youth. So they want to track the youth, is what's going on here, so they can sell stuff to them, influence them without them even knowing, have ads going across favourite videos, things like that. This is all subliminal type advertising. I know as a market analyst, subliminal images were placed in advertising in order to work on the subconscious, to create an attractor. There's like, without ethics and values, which is what I teach, without values, this becomes unlimited, but not in the sense that I often speak about in my videos. I'm talking about unlimited possibilities. I guess I should contextualize that around universal values, which will actually change the future in truth. When I come from an ethical platform, which is what's happening right now, because what I'm doing is quite risky. I'm talking about a whole industry that's very powerful. I can then be targeted because of a video such as this, be seen as disruptor, rather than freedom of speech, public opinion, respect of democratic rights, which is what we would want in a democratic society. I can then become labelled in some way, and certainly my data, including this video, is definitely stored, and I'm profiled as a result of expressing my own freedom. So I do this with great awareness. And it's not that I'm fighting anything. I am expressing something as my right because I see a social harm coming from this. So I'll read on what this parent has written. With the development of XAPI, the Ed Reform 2.0 vision of anytime, any place learning, anytime, any place learning where human teachers and school buildings are no longer required, could proceed more quickly. IMS Global is now supporting Mozilla's Open Badge initiative. XAPI metadata could eventually be combined with badge programs and blockchain/Bitcoin. See, Bitcoin's good because it teaches them how to trade. Technology to create e-portfolios, so this becomes all online digital currency. Online credential systems, credential systems. So then you can track them in terms of their expenditure, their digital. Everything's trackable. And if automatic credential verification and micropayment systems come to fruition, a virtual wallet voucher system could devastate already precarious public education funding. Now, what this also does, this virtual wallet, you've got to have money or bitcoins to operate within this free market. And it is, yeah, it's free market, all right. Perfect information is the free market scenario, perfect information. Well, we're not really being given perfect information. We're getting contoured content. We're getting information that others want us to get. The free market scenario, this is in economics, is actually one where there's perfect knowledge. Everybody knows everything. This is not that case. There's a lot obscured. We've got a lot of the avatars out there who appear to be this, but in an online world, you can't know who's real and who's not because you're not meeting them face to face. Anything can be contoured to look a certain way. It can look very reasonable. This is what I've come to know about spin doctoring. It looks really reasonable, but you have to dig deeper. This is where critical thinking comes in, which I have training in. So going back to the virtual wallet, what happens to those who aren't privy to online? What happens to those outside of the online environment? If everything goes online, what happens to cash? Well, they want to remove the cash economy because they want to make sure taxation is completely controlled, which is their lifeline. The Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative is a major player in the development of mobile, game-based and virtual learning environments. They also conduct extensive research and development on online personal learning assistance. I've seen that. And with the aim of creating digital personal tutors for all of us. So they're not even real. They're not people you can really talk to. It's like being on the phone, dial, press 1 for such and such, press 2 for press 3. And then you go to another recorded message, you know, press this, press that, and then another one. It's like, I just want a real person. That's what I see. And with the aim, okay, so personal learning assistants and with the aim of creating digital personal tutors. Their research is carried out at 4 cooperative laboratories or co-labs, which are located in Madison, Wisconsin, Alexandria, Virginia, Memphis, Tennessee, and Orlando, Florida. Good old US of A, leading the charge. Each lab supports partnerships with private sector interests and institutions of higher learning. So this is definitely a collaboration between the universities and the private sector. The Wisconsin Co-Labs works specifically on academic projects, mainly involving the Florida Virtual School, with whom they have a long-standing relationship. The Co-Labs focus is on competency-based education. I never found that particularly effective. I've done competency-based learning. I didn't enjoy it. I don't personally like online learning at all. I actually prefer interaction because I like to I like to explore topics. I'm not interested in being fed knowledge. And I want to meet people. I don't actually want to talk to a friggin' online personal assistant who they've sculpted to seem like a real human, like an artificial intelligence. No thanks. Not for me. Wow, this is just full on. They've partnered with the Educational Psychology Department of the University of Wisconsin, I can never say that, Madison, to create educational gaming platforms. Yeah, well, let's get them in through games. Psychology, you know, okay, if we construct the game this way, it'll take them down that mind map. If we construct the game that way, it'll take them down that mind map. And where do we want them to go? We want them to go here. So it's not like free thinking and you go, maybe this, maybe that. Well, what about this? What about that? There's no questions in this. This is all mind mapping. Wow, it's really incredible. And maintain over 60 other partnerships to research and refine game-based online instruction. I mean, I'm not opposed to having games online because I think they're great. Children like play. I'd love to have done it for peace education, where they actually work out conflicts like Syria, get the kids to work on that. How do we bring the people together? What is the problem that they're fighting over? Who is funding that problem? You know, what happens if we stop that funding? Of course, governments don't want to hear this bit, you know. And let's learn more about the culture of that people. Oh, they think like this, not like us. A lot of the war realities is not knowing the cultures they're having combat with, not respecting the, social, cultural norms of those cultures, not knowing how to communicate with them to resolve the conflict. Or there's business interests that are pushing government to, engage in conflict. So it's not just the war game scenario where children are having fun playing these war games. The real war games are not fun at all. They are very frightening and the children are often very traumatised. Children have mental health issues. They see their parents killed in front of them. Bombs go off and wipe out whole communities. This is the real world reality. And we want to bring this cyber reality to the world as a real world. Well, I'll read on. Goes on to say another focus has been on developing Maslow, I like that, or mobile access to supplemental learning objects. Maslow's also a play on words. It's to do with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's actually a psychological pyramid where where we want to go in the end is self-actualization. So you have your basic needs at the bottom of the pyramid met, so you need food, water, shelter. Then psychological needs, familial needs, family, the group. Can't remember it all now. What was it? Higher was so it's social needs, I guess learning needs, I'm thinking. But ultimately at the top is the self-actualization, which is what I call the awakening. They've used that wording because they've obviously thought about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of planning these online objects to try and move them up those scales, but not to self-actualization, more to profit maximization is the way I see it, which is enabled by XAPI technology. The Tennessee CoLab has been doing research on an intelligent tutoring system that even recognizes human emotion in the person using a given device and tries to counteract negative emotion. Okay, Susan, I saw your eyes go up like that. Are you puzzled? No, I'm concerned. So you're going to talk to me like you're a human, and so I form a bonded relationship with my artificial intelligence, and we get fond of each other. I remember my dad buying a computerized chess game, and he had a name for it. I can't remember what it was now because I was a kid at the time. And he formed a relationship with his chessboard. That's what they want. Emotionally, they want to suck you in that way. Here we go, DARPA. I didn't need to look it up. The Defence Advanced Research Projects Agency is also in the business of developing gaming simulations. Really? And intelligent tutoring systems. I think they've been in this game for a long time. We just have to look at the violent video games as simulators for learning how to be in combat and accept it as normal. So DARPA, the Defence Advanced Research Projects, which is, if we go back to the heading of this article that I'm reading from, is how exactly did the Department of Defence get into my child's classroom? Well, here we go. Now we've got defence here. They're also in the business of developing gaming simulations and intelligent tutoring systems. They work closely with the Office of the Navy. Their Engage program was set up in 2012, and through partnerships with Carnegie Mellon, Texas A&M, UCLA, University of California, and the University of Denver, created numerous games for K-12 students, so from kindergarten to grade 12, based on alternate reality teaching. Wow. Our space is in quotes, our space. In virtual environments, alternative reality teaching. Interesting. So Engage is the name of the program. They want you to engage. So Carnegie, I think, is right wing. Texas A&M, well, most of them would be. Instruction in social-emotional learning was built into the games. Instruction of social-emotional learning. Their full spectrum learning, sounds like full spectrum warfare, project aims to create an online platform that can monitor students and identify their strengths and weaknesses and revise, did my computer acknowledge that emotion? And revise the experience adaptively, so we're going to mold you, based on the data generated, so good, bad. You know, there'll be ways to move people through that. I'd like to see the instruction in social-emotional learning in the games. I would like to see that. I'm just reflecting on real social-emotional learning. See, I do experiential work, not online. You have to feel people. You have to feel yourself. I'm just going to go still for a little bit because I want to reflect on that, given that they're putting it online. Well, the first thought is social means two people. Learning from your emotions. So what online is going to evoke the emotions? People do get evoked by online images all the time. That's how they create the bonding. That's how they get the following. So that can be sculpted. So what I did, I'll give you an example of experiential social-emotional. Jane Elliott is a very good educator in the United States. She was from Texas. And basically she divided the children in the class by eye colour. Blue-Eyed series was the name of the program. She did this on the basis of Nazism, where the Nazis discriminated on the basis of eye colour, the blue-eyed Aryan race. So I would be your perfect example of what they were seeking to achieve. What they thought was perfect was white, blue-eyed. In my case, I see it as grey hair. You might see it as blonde. And they were saying that that was a superior race, which obviously was untrue. So what Jane Elliott did was she divided the children between blue and green, blue eyes and the green and brown-eyed. And she started by saying the blue-eyed were more superior, they're more intelligent. And so she would keep reinforcing the reasons for this. You know, see the white people, they do all this, they do everything much, much better. You know, look at the dark-skinned people. So she created a racial divide. And what happened was the children started having more conflict on the basis of division. And what she did was some tests, and she found that the blue-eyed children did better, the brown-eyed children did worse, because their self-esteem fell, their sense of self fell. They believed that they were unintelligent, so their IQ was, if you like, influenced by that suggestion. Suggestive education. This is how discrimination works. Then what she did was, she did this for a while, and of course it was conflicts breaking out the playground. Then she reversed it and said she'd got it wrong, that the blue eyes were actually a recessive gene. It was a weaker gene. The blue-eyed were actually inferior, and the brown-eyed were the original people on the planet, the indigenous people that had far higher knowledge. They were superior. And so she gave lots of evidence to support that claim. So what ended up happening was, again, the fights were continuing, but the brown-eyed children and green-eyed children, they're all kind of grouped together, were aggressive with the blue-eyed. They were the weak ones. They probably taunted them in the playground. You can just imagine. And then she did testing on them. And is there any surprise that the brown-eyed children did a lot better? The blue-eyed children failed. That is the power of suggestion. That is the shaping of children into the image of the one who either is dividing humanity or uniting humanity. Now, those children were deeply affected when they came to understand that this had been a game that had been played with them, and they were tested. Those children were interviewed years later. Through, I think, every 7 years they were interviewed again and again. They never forgot this experience because it went in. When they experienced the impact of discrimination, they felt terrible. They felt stupid. They felt excluded. When they were the top dog, they felt privileged. They felt successful. They felt intelligent. And this is what we do through money. Those who have the money, status, success, empowered. Those who have failed, losers, drug addicts, and on it goes. These are all forms of the same thing. Discrimination, us and them. And I recall a US president referring to the, are you with us or against us? That's how I know where that energy is coming from. It's division. When we create enemies, and I say this with love to those in the defence forces, the minute you create an enemy, you enter into that energy of us and them. If you sat down with the Afghan people, for example, I remember the British soldiers actually sitting with some Afghans when they wiped out this guy's whole family. They gave him whole wads of money. It was highly inflationary there at the time, so he was given wads of money. And the British soldier was deeply affected because he saw this man was just devastated. He lost everything. These were the poorest of the poor in the world. These men came in sophisticated weaponry, wiping out. They came in on the back of the bloody Russians who were in there doing the same thing. No respect for these civilians. These very simple people with no education, no IT, nothing, apart from a few satellite phones and some of the warlords who obviously had their privileges. No empathy. But this British soldier, I always remember this footage, he was really moved because he saw how beautiful this man was and he was so kind. The man was so kind to the British soldier. It's a bit like Falun Gong with the Chinese. There was a story of a Falun Gong member being beaten by a guard and she was jailed for meditating. That's the craziness of this, because that was seen as a threat to the control order. This man's beating her and beating her and beating her, and he's wiping his brow from sweat. She hands him a hanky with a shaking hand, and that's the very Christ-like movement of I love you, even though you're beating me. Now, people will listen to that and say, how could you love someone who's beating you? It's called unconditional love. This is the virtues of humanity. This is what resolves all conflict. But you won't be taught that online. You will not be taught the power within your own self online. It's not possible because those who have created it don't know that power. They only see money as power. And I send love to them as well. If I sat in the same room with them, there's no enemy here, just people who are believing differently from me. This is my contribution. This is my right. So that's what comes out of the social-emotional stuff that they've just talked about here. Alternative reality teaching they've talked about, and full-spectrum learning, social-emotional learning. Not possible online. You have to go through experiences in your life. And you have to have a teacher there to help you to see that this is how it feels when you do this to someone. So when you're on the computer ignoring everyone, how do they feel? How does your family members feel? How do your friends feel? How does your girlfriend feel? How does your partner or wife or husband feel when you're absorbed in this? Is this the real world? Is the big question. So let's go on reading this. This is part of the reality we have today. The arrival of ADL changed public education in a very fundamental way. Good word. It is no coincidence that the destructive No Child Left Behind Act was signed into law in the year after it was created. Over the next 15 years, with bipartisan support, so both sides of politics, education incrementally gave way to training, creativity to compliance, serendipity to standards, and human connection to digital isolation. That is in a nutshell what I see as well. We need to reflect. I'm reflecting, and I'm hoping that you're with me reflecting on this. Very important. This is a long video, and it has to be. Reflection is bringing in the wisdom to look at this and say, what does this mean? This is what philosophy does. What does this mean? Okay, so this parent has written this. So let's go back to those pointers because they're actually very, very important. And I've, in my experience, have seen it. So education gives way to training. What does that mean? It means you're going to be trained like a dog to roll over. You will learn how to do it the way someone instructs you. Sit, roll over, beg. I laugh because I can see the humour in that. Education is, well, what does that mean with the dog sitting, rolling over and begging? That's education. What does that mean to you? What meaning do you derive from that? This is the unlocking of the freedom within the human to choose, to decide, to make relevant from their own perspective. Rather than training, you will do this and don't question it. Now, the next bit is creativity to compliance. That's a big one for me as well, because I've really seen those dichotomies. I'm a creative, I'm a poet, I'm a philosopher, and I've been confronted with compliance paradigms myself, and I just go, what? You also get it when you are online and it says, do you agree with the terms and conditions? You've got no choice. You have to tick the box. No one reads the legal stuff because they just want to get on and do it, and they know that. They know that you are not going, they know you're not agreeing with those terms and conditions, but legally they have you. So education shows me that you ticking the box means they've got you legally. You've agreed to that. And I say, you've agreed to that in a court of law. Your Honour, person agreed to it. They ticked the box. We have their avatar. We've got their Microsoft Gmail account. linked to this. We know it was them. We've got them on camera because we can film them through their computer. See? So it works. So compliance is yes, no, do as you're told. Comply. It's funny, the images that come up my mind. I'm very creative. I remember that that child that ended up, I can't remember how it all went, it was a film. Child ended up in a spaceship, and there was this sort of technology that came out. So that would have been the technology as the avatar. And he'd say, oh, let's go across the country. And it goes, compliance. Remember that? Some of you might remember that film. That was really great, you know. And this kid was having a great time, you know, on this spaceship. And it had taken on some of his mind, his creativity as a child. So that technology mirrored to that child a childlike interaction, which is what these defence people want to do. They want to make it so it's really friendly and it speaks in your language, so it's tailored, it's personalised, right? In order to get you to comply. Compliance. Then we've got serendipity to standards. So serendipity is spontaneity. It's little freedom breakouts. Oh, I'll go that way. Oh, but that. Or serendipity. Oh, that thing happened at the same time. That's synchronicity. Standards is we go from this standard to this standard to this standard to this standard. It's very logical. Higher standards. Serendipity is very different. Human connection to digital isolation. This is the huge one. As a teacher myself, I'm innately a teacher. I'm not trained. I am trained, but not in the formal education system. I understand what teaching really means. Human connection is essential for the conveying of third-dimensional reality. There's nothing like sitting next to someone and talking. You think about the times you've had a conflict over the phone. It's not the same as actually sitting in front of that person. Digital isolation, you're on your own on the computer. You're not interacting other than these avatars that they create. It becomes very lonely. I just felt sadness then of what that future is going to look like. As the curriculum became narrower and narrower, emphasising standardised test scores and demonstrations of skill, this is to keep you hooked. It's like gambling. Education became a hollowed-out exercise. Something could be digitised and outsourced to corporations. This is a very sad parent, and I don't blame him. I agree with him. I just saw casinos, gambling, you hook them. It's about addiction, get them addicted. Data-driven standards-based tactics have been intentionally employed to regiment the very human process of teaching and learning. During ADL's first decade, the imperative was to get technology and internet into schools. Once that infrastructure was in place, they could concentrate on restructuring the curriculum, making screen-based education central, and pushing the teacher into a secondary role on the sidelines. I was actually imagining last night my teachers that I had as a child. I always remembered them. They're very significant. It's like mothers are very significant. It's very personal, and they want to replace that. Common Core state standards were a big part of that process. The National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers created the standards in 2009. Not as many people knew about the Common Education Data Standards that were established at the same time. SEDS enabled the collection and sharing of vast amounts of data across sectors, from pre-K through community college. The Learning Registry is another important piece of the puzzle. It was created in 2011 as a partnership between the US Department of Education and, once again, the Department of Defense. It is an open source distribution network of learning. I'm just thinking about ADL, but this is an open source distribution network of learning resource that holds metadata and paradata. So what's that? Meta and para. I'd like to know what paradata is. It is important to understand that learning objects can be tagged in many ways, including adding tags for a variety of standards. For that reason, even if we get rid of common core state standards, it wouldn't necessarily make a dent in slowing down the rollout of adaptive digital curriculum. In addition to metadata, which is data that describes individual education resources, the Learning Registry also collects paradata through the use of emitters that can be mounted on smart boards in classrooms. So what are emitters? I think they're going to explain it. Paradata describes how online learning resources are used. Who's doing the searches? What students are in the room with the person doing the searches? A history of searches conducted. What is being viewed, downloaded, and shared? What is favorited or embedded? To which standards is the selected content aligned? Which tags have been added to content? How is it being incorporated into the curriculum? What grade is it being used in? Where is it being used? What is the audience for the item? What the instructional setting is? What is the experience level of the class and the teacher? So that's paradata. So it's pretty intrusive. Too intrusive, that's privacy breached. Now I understand why my own privacy has been breached. The devices in our children's classrooms are largely there because of a specific set of government policies, have prioritised technology over human educators for the past 15 years. These devices are watching us as much as we are watching them. I'm going to watch you, but I know you're watching me too. Well, at least I'm consciously making a choice to be watched because I'm choosing to be heard. Given that the democratic structures are breaking down and I'm not heard through conventional channels, this is one of the ways. We're also watching you as well. We are watching. It goes both ways. It's not all one way. So these devices are watching us as much as we are watching them. And we should be aware that many of the programs in use are direct outgrowths of work done by the, I feel like I have some music, Department of Defence in partnership with private sector interests and institutions of higher education. Good on them. Technology can be used for good. Let's hope so. But not if it is given an unconditional pass in our classrooms. Shine a light on educational surveillance. Definitely. Ask questions, talk to others, and organise. Wow. So this has come from, I think it's come from wrenchinthegears.com. A 4-minute version of the end game is at the end here. I haven't actually looked at that. But there you have it. That's a perspective from a parent who's concerned about these industrial military approaches to education infiltrating a traditional system of faith-based education. The key question to everybody in this, and it's including those who are very actively involved in this, is this the future you want for your children? You've now been given a very important insight. In a democratic society, we get to choose, but we only get to choose when we make ourselves heard. It seems certain voices are heard more than other voices. I, for one, am voting for a democratic system which hears all voices. I'm very open to industry. I'm open to universities. I'm open to government. I'm open to defence. But invisibility of what these applications are really for. As it impacts on the future, we all have a right to a say in this, whether this is welcomed or not. We are, for this moment, still in democratic societies, those particularly engaging in this, and that democracy only exists as long as we, the people, speak up. And I'm certainly one of them. So with that, I send you love and peace and true freedom. Have fun. Bye.